My mother-in-law ruined my baby shower. What happened next left her in tears. I still feel the sting of those words whenever I recall that day. The moment I saw the decorations torn down and my guests looking horrified, my heart sank. It felt as though my entire future was crumbling right in front of me. I was 8 months pregnant, excited to celebrate with friends and family, only to find chaos I never dreamed possible. I clutched my phone in disbelief, barely able to breathe as my best friend described the scene. My mother-in-law, Clara, had arrived early, criticizing everything from the color of the balloons to the catering. It didn't stop there. She confronted my friends and made snide remarks about how unfit I was to be a mother. By the time I got there, half the guests were either in tears or ready to leave. This baby shower was supposed to be a moment of pure joy, a celebration of new life and fresh beginnings. Instead, it felt like an attack on my worth as both a mother and a person. As I surveyed the mess, anger welled up inside me. I knew I had to confront Clara, but I had no idea how explosive things would become. Rewind to a week before the baby shower. I remember smiling at the invitation list, feeling hopeful that this would be a chance for everyone to bond, especially Clara. She had never been warm to me, but I thought a joyful occasion might soften her. After all, we were about to welcome her first grandchild. I was naive enough to believe that would bring us closer. Clara's responses to my event details were curt. "Don't waste money on silly party favors," she said. "These people only care about free food." I tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe she was just old-fashioned. My husband, Jake, was caught in the middle. He insisted his mother wasn't truly mean, she just had strong opinions. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, hoping she'd show kindness, just once. Behind the scenes, I poured my heart into organizing everything. I picked out pastel decorations, arranged a dessert table, and even planned a small game to guess the baby's name. Every detail was meant to celebrate this new chapter in our lives. But as the day approached, Clara's comments grew sharper. Her words felt like tiny needles, poking holes in my enthusiasm until I could barely hold it together. The morning of the baby shower, I woke up energized despite my swollen ankles and aching back. I could feel little flutters in my belly, my baby's gentle way of reminding me that soon, none of the drama would matter. I focused on that new life for strength. But an hour before the party was set to begin, I got a frantic call from my friend, Avery. She told me Clara had arrived early and was already complaining about the music being too loud and the cupcakes looking cheap. My stomach twisted in knots. I wanted to maintain composure, so I calmly asked Avery to reassure Clara that everything was under control. Deep down, I dreaded how the day might unfold. My husband had left earlier to help set up, so I assumed he was managing things on site. As I drove to the venue, I imagined walking into a room full of smiles and support, maybe a few gentle ribbings about my baby bump. Instead, I walked into a nightmare. Toppled plates, scattered decorations, and guests huddled in corners trying to avoid Clara's wrath. My breath caught in my throat. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, and it was already ruined. Standing at the doorway, I saw Clara pacing like a storm, her sharp eyes settling on anyone who dared to glance her way. She spotted me almost immediately, and her lips curled into a sneer. "Finally decided to show up," she said with ice in her voice. I felt the sting of her comment, but I pushed past the humiliation to survey the damage. Streamers lay scattered on the floor. The cake table was partially toppled. A few close friends tried to fix the mess, but it was clearly a lost cause. Worse, I noticed tears in my younger sister's eyes. Clara must have aimed her cruel jabs at her, too. My fists clenched, nails pressing into my palms. This woman had turned what should have been a sweet celebration into a battlefield. Yet, I couldn't ignore the trembling in my legs, the humiliation, the anger, the heartbreak. It was like a tidal wave. My baby kicked in protest, as though sensing my distress. Jake finally appeared from the back room, looking utterly defeated. "I tried to stop her," he whispered, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. But in that moment, I realized something. If he couldn't stand up to his mother, then I would have to fight for myself and my baby. Clara wasted no time in launching another verbal assault. "This is the worst baby shower I've ever seen," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who picked these childish decorations? And that cake, it looks like something a toddler would bake." Her words oozed disdain. I glanced at the pastel balloons and the half-ruined cake shaped like a baby carriage. To me, they were still perfect because they represented joy and the promise of new life. Yet at that moment, her insults echoed in the silent room like stones hitting glass. A small group of guests, mostly my close friends, gathered near me, their faces reflecting anger and concern. Some of them tried to console me, but I could barely focus on their words. Every fiber of my being was consumed by frustration and disappointment. I felt robbed of the happiness this day was supposed to bring. I took a shaky breath, meeting Clara's cold gaze. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling but firm. Her only response was a dismissive shrug and a snide smile. Anger blazed through me, but before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me more determined than ever to stand my ground. With the tension at a breaking point, I tried to salvage the baby shower. Avery and a few others helped straighten the tablecloths. We placed the scattered streamers back onto chairs and tables, trying to recreate a festive atmosphere. But the damage was done. People whispered among themselves, unsure if the event would continue or end in further chaos. Jake approached me, remorse coloring his features. "I'm so sorry," he said. He explained that Clara had arrived in a foul mood, complaining that we didn't consult her enough about the party. She felt disrespected, or so she claimed. My heart sank. All this destruction because she wanted more control? Despite everything, I tried to be gracious. "Let's at least cut the cake," I announced. "Thank you all for being here. This baby is lucky to have such wonderful people in their life." We lit a small candle on the cake's corner, a symbol of hope that maybe we could salvage a fragment of joy. But the moment we started singing, Clara let out a loud, mocking laugh. She actually snuffed the candle out with her fingers, letting the flames sizzle on her fingertip. Silence fell again, and I saw my dream baby shower crumble once more. I excused myself to the bathroom, feeling tears brimming in my eyes. I couldn't let Clara see me cry. She'd take it as a victory. My heart pounded and my hands shook as I splashed cold water on my face, trying to collect myself. This was not how I pictured celebrating my baby's impending arrival. As I stared in the mirror, my reflection looked back at me with a mix of sadness and determination. I thought about everything I had sacrificed to make things work with Jake, moving cities, leaving my comfortable job behind, learning to be part of his family. Yet his mother treated me like an uninvited guest in my own life. I shut my eyes and took a deep breath. My baby deserved a mother who could stand strong. And I deserved some respect. Enough was enough. I decided then and there that I would not let Clara walk all over me anymore. When I emerged from the bathroom, I saw the guests milling around in uneasy silence. Clara stood in the corner, glaring at anyone who approached. Slowly, I walked toward her. If she wanted a confrontation, I was ready to give it. My heart raced, but my resolve was firm. I approached Clara with my shoulders squared, an unfamiliar fire in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, my voice clear and calm. The room hushed, and all eyes fell on us. She looked me up and down, unimpressed. "Talk about what?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "I think you've ruined enough for one day." Her words made me flinch, but I held my ground. "You're the one who ruined my baby shower," I managed, choosing each word carefully. My friend Avery gave me a supportive nod from the sidelines. Clara rolled her eyes. "If by ruin you mean telling the truth, then yes, I did." She folded her arms, clearly relishing the drama. I exhaled slowly, determined not to let my temper flare. "You've said enough. I want you to leave." The trembling in my voice betrayed me, but my intention was firm. I couldn't let her do any more damage. A stunned silence fell over the room. Even Jake looked taken aback. Clara's face flushed, her anger palpable. "You want me to leave my own grandchild's celebration?" she hissed. Without blinking, I nodded. "This is supposed to be about the baby and celebrating new life. Your behavior has no place here." For a moment, Clara just stood there, stunned. Then came the explosion. "Jake!" she yelled. "Are you hearing this? She's telling me to leave the baby shower. Me, your mother." Jake stepped forward, torn between his mother's fury and my obvious distress. "Mom," he said softly, "why don't we all just take a break? You're upset. Maybe we can talk later." That only inflamed Clara more. "Talk later," she repeated with a snort. "Don't be ridiculous, Jake. Who does she think she is?" The tension in the room was unbearable. Several guests picked up their bags, deciding it was best to leave and save themselves from further drama. I couldn't blame them. I felt guilty for subjecting them to this mess. But Clara wasn't leaving gracefully. She stormed over to the dessert table and grabbed the centerpiece, a lovely floral arrangement I had chosen with care, and hurled it to the floor. Glass shattered, water splashed everywhere, and I heard a collective gasp. I was so furious I could barely think straight. Jake, visibly shaken, escorted his mother toward the exit. She resisted, yelling insults at me until they were out the door. In that instant, a wave of relief washed over me. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. After Clara left, I tried to salvage what was left of the baby shower. The remaining guests, most of them close friends and family who truly cared, helped clean up. We decided to cut whatever was left of the cake and share a laugh, mostly to ease the tension. It wasn't the cheerful gathering I had planned, but it was something. I felt exhausted, physically and emotionally. My baby seemed to sense my stress, kicking more urgently than usual. I gently rubbed my belly, whispering, "It's okay. We'll be okay." Those words were as much for me as they were for my unborn child. Later that evening, Jake and I sat on the living room couch in silence. He looked drained, guilt etched across his face. I couldn't count how many times he'd apologized. "I never thought she'd go that far," he muttered, staring at his hands. "I'm so sorry." I wanted to be angry at him, but I saw he was hurting too. "She's your mother," I said, my voice soft. "I understand it's complicated." Still, a part of me resented him for not stopping her sooner. That resentment simmered quietly, and I knew it wouldn't go away without a deeper conversation. Over the next few days, Clara's behavior lingered like a dark cloud over our home. My phone buzzed with texts from relatives who'd heard varying accounts of what happened. Some supported me wholeheartedly, while others insinuated that I should have just let Clara have her say to keep the peace. Jake's phone was no different. Clara left a barrage of voice messages, claiming I was poisoning his mind and that she'd done nothing wrong. I could see the strain in his eyes each time he pressed play and listened to her rants. Meanwhile, I struggled to focus on my final prenatal checkups. My doctor noticed my stress levels were high, warning me to rest more. But how could I rest when I felt like my marriage was caught between honoring my baby's future and appeasing a tyrant mother-in-law? One evening, Jake and I had a heart-to-heart. "We need to set boundaries," I said. "For our sake and for the baby's." He nodded slowly, admitting he'd been avoiding conflict with his mother for years. In that moment, I realized just how deep her manipulation ran. We agreed. From now on, we'd protect our family's peace at all costs, no matter Clara's reaction. Jake and I decided to attend a family counseling session, hoping an unbiased mediator could help us handle the tension with Clara. It felt odd to bring our private issues to a stranger, but we were desperate. During the session, the counselor listened patiently as we recounted the baby shower disaster. She suggested that Clara might be acting out of fear or jealousy, feeling like she was losing control over her son's life. I scoffed internally. Could that really justify her cruelty? Still, the counselor encouraged us to have a structured conversation with Clara, one focused on boundaries. We left with a plan. We'd invite Clara to a neutral space, a quiet cafe where we could talk calmly. The following weekend, we sent Clara an invitation to meet. Her response was surprisingly swift. She agreed, but only if we let her choose the cafe. That tiny demand made me roll my eyes, but Jake insisted we accommodate her for the sake of peace. I felt nervous as we prepared for that meeting. A part of me hoped for genuine healing, a chance to put the baby shower incident behind us. Another part of me braced for another ambush. I secretly vowed that if she crossed the line again, I wouldn't hold back. The cafe was in a fancy neighborhood, complete with crystal chandeliers and velvet chairs. It felt less like a peaceful spot for reconciliation and more like a stage for Clara to flaunt her status. Jake and I arrived early, choosing a table away from the main entrance to avoid prying eyes. Clara swept in with an air of superiority, wearing a tailored suit and carrying a designer handbag. She barely acknowledged me, aiming her cold, piercing gaze at Jake. "Let's get this over with," she announced, taking a seat. We explained why we were there, outlining our desire to establish healthier boundaries. Clara clicked her tongue in disapproval. Boundaries? For what? She demanded. I'm your mother, Jake. I deserve to be part of every decision, especially concerning my grandchild. My heart pounded as I spoke up. We appreciate your involvement, but that doesn't give you the right to disrespect me or disrupt important events in our lives. She narrowed her eyes. If I disrespected you, it's because you set yourself up for it, she replied, voice dripping with disdain. Her words stung, and I fought to keep my composure. It became clear that this meeting wouldn't be a calm discussion. If anything, it was just fueling the fire. Jake tried to steer the conversation toward a solution. Mom, he said, voice trembling slightly, you went too far at the baby shower. We just want an apology and a promise to respect our space. An apology. That was all I wanted too. An acknowledgement that she was wrong to belittle me, sabotage the decorations, and humiliate me in front of loved ones. But Clara merely scoffed. You owe me an apology, Jake, for embarrassing me by marrying someone so inadequate. That final word twisted like a knife in my chest. I felt the heat rising in my face. Jake's hand gripped my arm under the table, as if to hold me back from responding in anger. Mom, he said, voice sharper now, stop talking about my wife like that. His frustration bled through every syllable. Clara's expression hardened. Is this how you repay me for raising you? You side with her? She's driven a wedge between us. I took a deep breath, trying to find calm in the chaos. No one's driving a wedge, Clara, I managed. We want you to be part of our child's life, but you have to stop treating me like an enemy. She shook her head, standing up abruptly. I'm done here, she announced. You've made your choice. The cafe meeting ended with Clara storming out, leaving behind a swirl of tension and unspoken words. Jake looked devastated, and I felt more worried than ever. We hadn't achieved any sort of resolution, just more pain. Over the next few weeks, I focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. My due date was fast approaching, and I wanted nothing more than a peaceful home. Jake and I set up the nursery, folding tiny clothes and assembling a crib. Each pastel-colored blanket offered a brief moment of joy amidst the family drama. Yet, Clara's shadow loomed. She sent text messages every few days, each one more venomous than the last. She threatened to take matters into her own hands if we dared to exclude her from her grandchild's life. The emotional toll weighed heavily on me, and I could see it in Jake's weary eyes. Despite the chaos, one small ray of hope glimmered. A neighbor told us about a different approach, reaching out to Jake's father, who'd been keeping a low profile. Maybe he could persuade Clara to change. But Jake was hesitant. His father had never been successful in standing up to Clara before. Still, I filed the idea away as a last resort if things got worse. Time marched on, and my delivery day finally arrived. After 12 intense hours of labor, I welcomed our baby girl into the world. The moment I heard her first cry, tears of joy streamed down my face. Jake kissed my forehead, whispering, "She's perfect, you did great." For a day or two, it felt like we were living in a blissful bubble. Just me, Jake, and our newborn. We savored every coo, every stretch of her tiny limbs, every soft gurgle. But Clara found a way to intrude even then. She showed up at the hospital unannounced, barging into my room while I was trying to rest. Jake gently tried to deter her, but she insisted she had a right to see her granddaughter. I was exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open, but I mustered enough strength to say, "Can we schedule a time for you to visit at home? I need rest." Her eyes flashed with anger. Rest? When I gave birth to Jake, I was up and about the next day. She scoffed and marched right up to my hospital bed. "Give her to me," she demanded, arms outstretched. My body tensed. Even in my weakened state, my protective instincts roared to life. Jake stepped between us, carefully shielding our newborn. "Mom, please. She needs to rest. You can hold the baby later," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Clara gave him a look of pure indignation. "Don't tell me what to do. That's my grandchild." From my hospital bed, I could sense my pulse quickening. "Jake, get her out," I whispered, my voice trembling from both fatigue and anger. He guided his mother toward the door, insisting they talk in the hallway. Alone, I exhaled a shaky breath. My heart ached with the realization that this woman wouldn't stop invading our peace, even during the most vulnerable moment of my life. I glanced at my sleeping daughter, tears pooling in my eyes. She deserved a calm, loving environment, not a battlefield. A few minutes later, Jake returned, looking pale. "She's furious, but I told her to leave," he explained. "She said we'll regret this." My emotions were a whirlwind, grateful that Jake finally stood firm, but terrified of what Clara might do next. One thing was clear. If she refused to respect our boundaries now, I would protect my baby at any cost, even if it meant cutting her out of our lives entirely. When we brought our baby girl home, I dreaded the possibility of Clara showing up. Jake and I agreed not to give her a key or let her barge in unannounced. We locked our door and kept the curtains drawn whenever we feared her arrival. It felt odd living this way, anxious and on guard, when we should have been peacefully bonding as a new family. Clara's aggression escalated in phone calls. She insisted that I was brainwashing Jake, that I was trying to sever his bond with her. She left voicemails filled with threats and guilt trips. "I raised you, Jake," she shouted in one message. "How dare you lock me out like a criminal?" Still, Jake remained resolute, telling her that until she could show genuine respect, she was not welcome. As the days passed, my gratitude for my husband's loyalty grew. I saw how much he struggled with defying his mother, but he did it for us, for our child. In those weeks, I discovered an inner strength I didn't know I had. When I held my baby against my chest and felt her soft warmth, I remembered why I was fighting this battle: to protect our new family from Clara's toxic grip. One afternoon, as I rocked my baby to sleep, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I would ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. It turned out to be Jake's father, Clara's estranged husband. He spoke in a calm, low voice. "I've heard about the troubles with Clara," he began. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what you're going through. I know how she can be." Part of me felt relieved that someone on Clara's side of the family understood how extreme she could get. He offered to mediate, suggesting we all meet in a public space. "I can talk to Clara beforehand," he promised, "and maybe we can find some common ground." I relayed this to Jake, who was skeptical but also hopeful. We decided to give it one more shot. Maybe having Clara's husband there would keep her in check. A week later, we arranged to meet at a nearby park. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to warm the playground. I kept our baby close in a stroller, uncertain if it was wise to bring her. But a part of me wanted Clara to see her granddaughter in a safe, open environment. Maybe that would soften her heart. We arrived at the park to find Jake's father, Robert, waiting by a bench under a big oak tree. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his wedding ring. He greeted us with a gentle smile and a kind nod toward the baby. "She's beautiful," he said softly. Clara showed up a few minutes later, wearing a tense expression. She spotted Robert first, her face flickering with confusion. Perhaps she hadn't realized he would be there. When she noticed Jake and me, especially the stroller, her eyes widened. We took a seat on the bench, maintaining a cautious distance. Robert started the conversation, keeping his voice calm. "We all want to be in this baby's life," he said, glancing at Clara. "But that requires respect, kindness, and understanding. Don't you agree?" Clara folded her arms and looked away. For a long moment, it seemed like she might just storm off again. But then she let out a long sigh. "Fine," she muttered. "I'm listening." It felt like progress, however small. Encouraged, Jake began explaining how the baby shower incident impacted us, how it hurt and humiliated me. I chimed in, calmly describing my feelings. Clara remained quiet, her jaw clenched. Robert gently placed a hand over hers, urging her to respond. After we spoke, Clara finally broke her silence. "I felt disrespected," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "No one consulted me on the baby shower. I was left out of the planning, and then I was blamed for speaking my mind." I took a breath, trying to empathize while also standing my ground. "We never intended to exclude you," I explained. "We wanted everyone to have a good time. But you went too far. You destroyed decorations, insulted guests, and made me feel worthless." Jake nodded in agreement. "Mom, we can't move past this if you don't acknowledge that." Clara's face tensed, as though she was battling her pride. She looked at Robert, who offered a supportive nod. After a moment, she said, I guess I was out of line." It wasn't a flowery apology, but it was a start. My shoulders relaxed, relief flooding me. "That means a lot," I whispered, feeling tears prick my eyes. My baby began to fuss, so I lifted her out of the stroller to comfort her. Clara stared at her granddaughter, a mixture of longing and regret in her eyes. For a split second, I thought we might find a real path to peace. Little did I know, more turmoil lay just ahead. As the park meeting wound down, Jake and I felt cautiously optimistic. Clara seemed subdued, maybe even remorseful. Robert looked relieved. We parted ways with tentative plans to keep talking. For a few weeks, things were relatively calm. Clara sent polite text messages asking about the baby's health. She even stopped by once with a small gift, a stuffed teddy bear. It felt like progress, and I began to hope that our daughter might actually have a loving grandmother. But one evening, Clara called Jake in a panic. She claimed she'd heard rumors that I was planning to cut her out of the baby's life permanently. Confused and frustrated, Jake told her no such thing was happening. But her accusations lit a fire in me. Clearly, Clara was still looking for fights where none existed. I told Jake I couldn't keep dealing with these outbursts. "We gave her a chance," I said, exhaustion creeping into my voice. "If she wants to keep picking battles, then maybe she doesn't deserve to be around our baby." He sighed heavily. "I know, but let's see if we can smooth this out without a big blow-up." I agreed, though my patience was nearly gone. I felt a storm brewing again. The storm arrived on a Monday morning. Jake was at work, and I was in the living room nursing the baby. That's when I heard a loud knock at the door. My heart sank. I had a feeling it was Clara. When I opened the door, she marched in without waiting for an invitation, eyes red and voice shaking with anger. "How dare you try to shut me out?" she cried. "I've heard from multiple people that you're planning to move out of state. Are you really going to steal my grandchild away?" I took a step back, stunned. "We're not moving," I said firmly, trying to keep the baby calm. "Who told you that?" She ignored my question, pacing around the living room as if searching for evidence of my alleged plan. "I've done everything I can to be part of this family, and you treat me like a nuisance," she shouted. My daughter began to wail, sensing the tension. I tried to hush her, heart pounding. "Clara, please, you're scaring the baby. You need to leave." She whirled on me, her face contorted with rage. "Don't tell me what to do. You're nobody, and I'm Jake's mother." In that moment, my anger turned icy cold. Enough was enough. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had. I cradled my baby close and locked eyes with Clara. "Get out." Each word was slow and deliberate. She looked taken aback, almost shocked that I, the girl she'd always dismissed, was standing up to her. "Excuse me," she spat. I set my jaw. "You heard me. This is my home. You have no right to barge in here, making wild accusations and shouting at me in front of my child. Leave." Clara glanced at the baby, then at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, as if she realized how far she'd gone. But her pride wouldn't let her soften. "I'll leave when I'm good and ready," she insisted. I stood my ground. "Then I'll call the police for trespassing." The words tasted foreign in my mouth, but I meant them. She needed to understand that her reign of terror was over. Her jaw dropped. She glared at me, her rage boiling. But faced with the threat of legal consequences, she finally turned and stalked toward the door. Before leaving, she whispered venomously, "You'll regret this." Then she slammed the door behind her, leaving my heart pounding in my ears. For a week, I heard nothing from Clara. No calls, no texts. Jake told me she was sulking, and he was fine with leaving her to her own devices. We both agreed we deserved peace. We focused on our daughter. Her first smiles, her tiny fingers grasping ours, her soft coos that reminded us life could be sweet despite the darkness we'd endured. Then came the twist I never saw coming. Clara showed up on our doorstep early one morning, tears streaming down her face. She held a letter in her trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I received these divorce papers from Robert. He says he's had enough of me driving people away." I stood there, baby in my arms, unsure how to respond. Clara's eyes were puffy and red, her usual arrogant posture deflated. I never wanted this," she sobbed. "I was just so afraid of losing everyone." In that moment, all her bravado and hostility peeled away, leaving behind a woman who was scared and alone. Despite everything she'd done to me, I felt a twinge of sympathy. That day, something shifted. We didn't become best friends overnight, but for the first time, Clara seemed genuinely repentant. And that, I realized, was the key to our fragile truce and the beginning of real change.